distinct pleasure of introducing our board chair, Mr. Dave Dennis, who's also president and one of our sponsors of Specialty Contractors and Associate. It's very appropriate for Dave Dennis to introduce Dr. Rolnick because of their experience in the Federal Reserve and so much from the business perspective. So Dave Dennis, welcome, and then he will introduce Dr. Rolnick. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Linda, and thank all of you for attending what is the first, hopefully we'll say annual, semi-annual, we don't know how frequent this will be, but certainly the inaugural real event for the Children's Foundation of Mississippi. This is really a unique opportunity. It's St. Patrick's Day, and there are a lot of things. If you look at change in Mississippi, you look at the things we're trying to do, there are many, many, many opportunities in this state. Just look at this week alone. We went on daylight savings times. We had the Ides of March on Tuesday. Today's St. Patrick's Day. Tomorrow's a full moon. Sunday's a vernal equinox for spring starting. So what does that mean? It's a renewal. It's an opportunity. It's a chance to look at what we're doing perhaps from a different lens. And that's what the Children's Foundation is truly trying to do in many instances with respect to early childhood education and many other education venues. This is a true unique opportunity. Today's speaker, Art Rolnick, Dr. Art Rolnick, I had a chance to be part of the Federal Reserve System as a $200 a month guy. Art made a whole lot more, which was good, but anyway, I had a chance to chair in many venues around the country, and there were 3 or 4 people that really were key to the research within what took place within the Federal Reserve System. Bob Eisenbeiss, that Art knows certainly from Atlanta, and several others, that when you would see, like yesterday, the Federal Reserve System raised interest rates a quarter point. Well, the people that do the research really churn the numbers, and then you see your Board of Governors and others such as Chairman Greenspan, or in this instance, Jerry Powell, making those determinations. Art was one of those people in that rarefied air that made really the numbers work. So he comes from an incredibly unique background in terms of an economist within the Federal Reserve System. He is an adjunct professor at the University of Minnesota, and he has done many things economically. But at this point in his life, as a choice for what he wanted to do, he's moved into early childhood and other education venues, and he's doing it around the world. He's doing it in many, many, many places. So to that extent, I applaud him for his dedication, his avocation to going out and trying to help people literally all over the world with no exception. And it is because of many people in this room that we're able to put this organization together. And it is 2.5 years old, so we're emerging. So Art, you are the first keynote speaker, and we've got many people such as the Phil Hardin Foundation that have sponsored us, that put together a group that wants to move this state forward. And we look very much with favor into hearing your comments, but most importantly, we thank you for what you've done in so many instances, and we'll have a short Q&A afterwards. But Dr. Art Rolnick, thank you very much, and welcome aboard.
Good afternoon. I know if I was in the audience, I'd be asking the question. Our speaker for lunch is from the Federal Reserve. In fact, I was with the Federal Reserve for 40 years. And a question I would have is, how does an economist from the Federal Reserve get involved in this issue of early childhood education? I tell people I used to worry about banks, now I worry about babies. So I'm going to give you that backstory and how I got involved. This goes back about 20 years. But then I'm going to make my major point. My major point is that high quality early childhood education targeted to our most at-risk families is probably the best public investment we can make. And I want you to think about early childhood development as economic development. That's my basic message. So to make that point, I'll give you that backstory, how I got started, talk about the research involved, and then I won't leave you there with the research, which I'm going to argue is overwhelming, that we're underinvesting in these children. But then I'm going to talk about how in Minnesota in particular, we took the research to reality, how we put it in practice, and how successful we've been. Okay, so how does an economist at the Federal Reserve get started? Again, about 20 years ago, I was at a lunch, and a former governor of the state of Minnesota and a former mayor of Minneapolis was trying to present the case for why we should be funding early childhood education for our most vulnerable kids. And I raised my hand and I said, you are making a moral argument. I don't disagree with that, but I don't think it's going to have political legs, because moral arguments could be made for investing more in K-12 and higher education and reducing crime. Policymakers need more than moral arguments. And I said to the former governor and mayor that I thought possibly you can make an economic argument. Well, that was my mistake, because they said, okay, Rolnick, come on our board, and how about doing that for us? I was a little bit skeptical that it would work out so well, but I said, it's hard to turn them down. So again, about 20 years ago, I went back to my office and I recruited a colleague of mine, Rob Grunwald, and I said, Rob, I've committed us to doing this, but I said, don't worry. I think there's some literature out there, some research out there that we can go to, summarize it for the governor and the mayor. Actually, it was an organization called Ready for K, summarizes for this organization and take us a couple months and we'll be done. And that's what we did. And it went viral. I mean, I've been all over the world on this issue. They pushed it out, and I guess somebody from the Federal Reserve, I have some credibility that maybe this is a good investment. Okay, so the question then becomes, what did we find? What would we find this research that made this argument and made it go viral? So I'm going to talk about two lines of research, totally independent. There's neuroscience research on brain development, and then there's these longitudinal studies where children have been in high quality programs, and we have all these results that go all the way to their adults, and now we have actually research on the children of the children. So what did Rob and I do? We first looked at a study called the Preschool study, which became a fairly famous study in the educational field. It began in the early 60s in Ypsilanti, Michigan. And what they did is they randomly divided up about 123 children into two groups. One group gets high quality pre-K, one group, control group, is just a control group. They don't get the program. High quality pre-K, what did that mean? It means master level teachers, small classroom size, working with the parents. And these were, by the way, 123 low income families. So these we labeled, generally speaking, coming out of poverty, these are vulnerable kids. So randomly divided into two groups. The group that got the high quality pre-K, as I said, small classroom size, well-designed curriculum, 4 or 5 days a week, and home visits, working with the parent. So understand this was a very parent-focused intervention. It wasn't just simply taking a child and putting him into a pre-K program. This involved the family. And there was a 10-year study, 20-year study, 30-year study. 30-year study, Rob and I had all the data from 30 years. But it was interesting. The 10-year study, they found that the kids who were in the program when they started pre-K were starting school already. Were really looked like they were ready compared to the control kids that didn't have the program. And they were testing out pretty high. But by the third grade, there was no difference. And the question became, especially when it came to IQ, it didn't seem to affect the IQ at all. So it looked like after 10 years, this intervention wasn't very successful. However, when we went out to 20 years and 30 years and beyond, we found that the kids that were in the program were less likely to need special ed, were less likely to be retained in a grade, were more likely to be literate by the 6th grade, graduate high school, get a job, pay taxes, stay off welfare. The crime rate between the two groups, again, we're always comparing it to the control group, the crime rate went down 50%. That looked pretty good to us. And we asked a question that most economists would ask, or business people: what was the return on that investment? So we know how much it cost. In today's dollars, it was roughly $10,000, $11,000 per year. It was a 2-year program. And we have all these benefits that I mentioned, and economists can put dollar values on those benefits. So we have a bunch of dollar values and benefits going out all these years, and we have the cost of the program at the beginning, which was roughly $10,000, $11,000 per year. And we asked a very simple question. Given that data, what was the return, the annual rate of return on that investment? And there's a formula. Given that kind of data, you plug it in and you can back out the implied rate of return. We were hoping to get about 6% annual rate of return because post-World War II, that was the annual average rate in the stock market. So if you're going to pull money out of the economy, you want to make the case that we can do better. So I figured our hurdle was if we can get above 6, say 7%, 8%, we can make a case. I could go back to the governor and the mayor and this organization Ready for K and say, look, you can make a strong economic case if we can get 8% inflation adjusted return. So we worked through the numbers, we calculated this annual rate of return. We found an 18% inflation adjusted return. It was so high, I said to Rob, go back and redo it because it's almost too high to, who's gonna believe that? Well, he went back 2-3 times, went over his numbers, 18% is what he got. And I sent that to a colleague of mine at the University of Chicago, James Heckman, Nobel laureate, who was looking at the same studies. I said, Jim, do me a favor. Could you check these numbers? A couple months later, I get a cryptic note back from him, 18%. So now I'm pretty confident we did it right. It turns out there's 3 studies like this, longitudinal studies, all come up with the same double-digit returns. That was the bottom line. When we looked at the research, when we looked at these studies, it's overwhelming. It's clear we're underinvesting in these kids. And we argued, and our bottom line was probably the best economic return. This is our future workforce. This is a huge benefit. Most of these benefits are public. This 18% return, a large part of that is a public benefit. We save money to the schools, society does better. These kids grow up and get good jobs, stay off welfare. Again, these are a lot of public benefits here. That was our bottom line. I happened to be speaking in Boston on these issues, and a fellow became a friend, took me aside and said, Rolnick, I really like what you're doing, but however, you're focusing on 3- and 4-year-olds. That was the Perry Preschool program. He told me, for many of the most vulnerable kids, you're starting too late. I didn't know what he was saying. Well, this fellow his name was Jack Shunkoff. He was the co-editor of a book From Neurons to Neighborhoods, and he mentored me on the importance of brain development, starting at the very beginning, starting at birth. And that environment that a child is in is critical to how that brain develops. And if they're in a stressful environment, by age 3, there are serious problems with brain development. So he convinced me that if we were going to take this into the policy arena, we better come up with a program that doesn't start with 3- and 4-year-olds, that starts much earlier. And so we came up with a very straightforward idea. Provide a scholarship to parents to go to high quality program like Perry Preschool, and has to start at the beginning. And so we have a scholarship plus a parent mentor, say a doula starting at prenatal, but a parent mentor working with the family at the earlier years. So we have this positive interaction between the parent and the child. Because brain development up by age 3 is so important. So it's, when I talk about early childhood education, I'm talking prenatal to 5. That was our program. We called it the Minnesota Model for Early Learning. Why did we call it that? Well, now I'm at the part of my talk where I'm going to explain how we took the research and took it to reality. And there were some business people in Minnesota who heard me speak and decided they would set up a foundation. It was called the Minnesota Early Learning Foundation. Board members were CEOs of Best Buy and Ecolab and Target, General Mills, and president of the University of Minnesota, CEO of Blue Cross Blue Shield. It was a very distinguished board, let's put it that way. We raised $20 million privately to do a pilot. We took a low-income neighborhood in St. Paul. We provided close to 400 scholarships, mentorship for parents, and kind of flooded the neighborhood. Ran out of money once mother got out of bed and dad was broken. And we showed it worked. We showed that parents, all our parents used the scholarships. Initially, there weren't forced programs in that poverty expanded, but when the word got out to the market, every parents had scholarships paying up to $12,000 to $15,000 a year. We brought in an outside expanded, and actually we were getting the results. So our parents, within 6 months, they had no problem finding and forcing our rated program. The scholarships had to be used in quality rated data, but our kids brought in an outside evaluator. The national unheard of, getting the kind of results that research said we were coaching the country. We were not just affecting our child's, we were affecting our parents' life. And this is going back to 2010. Now parents were going back to work. That's bringing in we got extra benefit. We were so successful. Child benefit in Washington, and 45 benefit, and our parents were going back to school and back to work. Today, of course, is critical because we started back so many good results by providing high quality early childhood communities. So the point I'm making here, we're all getting the science is there. We know how to close it. Ethnic maps in Minnesota, we have one of our things. We provide the resources, empower the parents, color market. They start school online, and the research shows how those parents start. So that was the Minnesota model, and imagine in today's economy, state bipartisan support doesn't graduate 70 million a year. We have a high percentage of kids not graduating. You have a serious economic problem. You need quality workforce. This year, you need a strong workforce. More than you need our kids graduating high school, going to full tech or college. Critical. Let me just conclude with some very recent research. If these kids don't graduate high school, I made this comment making this case. This is the best public investment. So James Heckman was able to get data on opportunities for preschool kids when they were older girls, and this is less heart disease, less diabetes, I just want stronger mental health. So long term, there's a health component. James Heckman was able to get a lot of data on the adults. He also was able to get data on children of the children. As adults, less heart disease, less diabetes. From the preschool, had the high quality program. Their children are much more likely to graduate high school. So this is a great way to get intergenerational poverty. So this is not only the best tool that you have, start, get the boots on, make sure these kids start to they benefit from family benefits and community benefits. So I'll go back to my bottom line. Early childhood education, high quality, if you need help in any way, shape, empowering these tools, mentors, and scholarships, the best public investment in America. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. It is rare when you have an opportunity to have someone that is academically credentialed, which is certainly to be admired, but to have somebody that has the academic credentials, the pure instinctive and intuitive abilities to just understand and deal with things, purely innately intelligent. That's our Rolnick. And it's almost like the old E.F. Hutton commercials. You'd sit in the room, and when E.F. Hutton, A.E., perhaps Art Rolnick would start speaking, people just kind of calm down and said, "What's he got to say?" Because that is the level you're operating at. Art, you've been kind enough to often take a few questions. One that has been submitted was, how do we continue to get parents to stay engaged and not fade away after they get a child that was, say, initially involved? How do you keep them totally engaged in with the process of continuing to emphasize early childhood education in the church?
Well, as I said, our program really starts with parent mentoring as early as prenatal, and we're showing that when we do that, our kids are more likely to go in full weight, full term, and not addicted. And then once you get the parents, you know what I learned, I thought abuse was the problem, it's neglect. Once you explain to these parents how important it is to sing and read and play with your kids at the earliest ages, it makes a huge difference. that they come to the plate, if you will. Our parents are amazing. Many of our parents do that, and it changes their life. They go back to school. They are able to go back to work. And when we interviewed our parents who were in our program, we asked them, what did you like, or what worries you with our program? Well, they love the mentors, they love the scholarship. Their concern would be kindergarten, third grade, would that be 4-star rated? And I said, I declared victory at that point. We now have parents, many of them hadn't graduated high school. They're so engaged now that they want to make sure that that quality pre-K program continues into the K-3 arena. So if you start early enough with these parents, especially first child, you can get the parents engaged, and we think that's a critical component to get the results that we're talking about. Our program is not simply taking a child and putting them in pre-K. And we really work with the family, the mother in particular, although the father is just as important. Indeed, I'm working with the criminal justice system, working with incarcerated dads, that before they leave jail, we're working on mentoring them, making sure that family has scholarship. So when I talk about vulnerable kids born at the poverty, kids born with incarcerated parents, homeless children, homeless families, foster kids, it's an array. And we know it's not difficult to identify the vulnerable kids. The real issue is funding. You don't want to get started on this. In Minnesota, we've already spent $1 billion on sports stadiums. I'm going to tell you, there is very little public return there. These kids are a high public return. We've got to make sure our policymakers know this is where the next dollar should go. Not the stadiums, but to these kids. This is their future.
Another question that has come up: what is the likelihood of universal early childhood education? Not child care, but early childhood education. What is your sense as you've traveled around the country? You've been in virtually all 50 states promoting what you're doing, and certainly around the world. What is your sense of the appetite for universal early childhood education, certainly in this country in particular?
Sure. I think once you get into the science, what I would say about universal, the initial funding that you get should be targeted at those vulnerable kids. If we can get more funding, so you take these scholarships and you provide them to families that make over 200% poverty, 300% over poverty, you might even go to 400 or 500% over poverty. And so universal in the sense that you bring it up and maybe do partial scholarships that higher family income is. I don't think we need to provide free pre-K to Jeff Bezos kids. I think we have limited dollars. Start with the most at-risk. Do that first. That is key. These are high-return children. All kids, of course, need a great start. Fortunately, most kids, most middle-class and upper-middle-class kids do get a good start. Nevertheless, there are no question, pre-K, quality pre-K is important for all kids. I would just point out, as I did at the very beginning of my talk, we have limited dollars. The best investment right now is the vulnerable kids. And then we can talk. It's very difficult. If you just do Universal 4 as Oklahoma did, it's too late for a lot of those vulnerable kids. That usually it benefits, the uptake is usually middle and upper middle class kids. And you got to do more work than that than just simply providing Universal 4. And as I said, our mentoring at the very beginning, prenatal, gets these parents engaged. If you don't do that Universal 4, and that's happened in Oklahoma, you're going to miss a lot of the most vulnerable kids. So I would say target first, and I think when I go around the country and I've worked with this administration and past administrations, they agree with me. And the Department of Education recognizes that they may use the word universal, but they all say when it's initial funding is going to go to the most at-risk kids.
All right, Art, this is actually my question. You mentioned that initially you put together a blue ribbon group of people and you started with private money, and that private money evolved into a prototype program. You put it in play, you took it perhaps to the governor, you took it to legislative leaders, so to speak. At what point did you try to transition into accepting public monies as opposed to simply going with the private sector? Because private sector can carry it initially, but sooner or later there probably needs to be some sense of making that transition? When did you know?
Yeah, Dave, that's a great question. It's a great question. And when I got into this space, remember, I'm a research guy, also I'm in the policy space. But from a research point of view, if you're a private company and you saw an 18% inflation-adjusted return, it would not go unfunded for very long. Overnight, I guess, I could attract money from 18% and fully funded. So my whole thing was, we've got to take this to scale. And scholarships, this program, we call Minnesota Model, is relatively easy to bring to scale, providing scholarships for these kids. We use existing infrastructure. We use all hands on deck. We use all the quality programs out there, public, private, etc. But to bring it to scale, private sector isn't good. They don't have that kind of funding. The whole idea of the Minnesota Early Learning Foundation, and we strategized with the CEO target, best by equal, let's do a pilot. Let's show we can do it well, and then sell it to the state. Show them the evidence. Say, if we don't get results, and we got these great results, don't pay us. But if we get these results, we've got to go to scale. And scale for Minnesota means about $300 million a year for all kids born into poverty. Every kid born into incarceration. That's that's bringing it to scale. And that's not going to happen in the private sector. The private sector can show the way. We had some terrific business people on this board. And we did show the way. And it went viral, by the way. It did, you know, I've been selling this model around the country, around the world, and it is, because it works. But it's got to be government. Because and why government? It is a public good. It should be the government. Most of these benefits are public benefits. You benefit, your society benefits, and these kids succeed. So we actually started out with the idea that we were eventually going to take it to the state, public funding, that we reviewed it as a public-private partnership. The state had to do the major funding.
All right, last question. I'm going to let you actually ask yourself a question. What do you see that we need to be doing as a fledgling organization, a 2.5-year-old organization that is privately at this point funded through foundational activities such as Phil Hart and others, but just privately non-public monies? What do you see as our perhaps clearest pathway forward to having meaningful and impactful results to what we're doing?
So in virtually every city, every state that I've given this talk to, my answer to that question is start small, do a pilot, take a community, and provide these scholarships to this community. And I would keep it small, so I would flood the community and show that it works. Show that once you empower these parents as early as you can, you get these strong results. And how could you therefore not, how can the state or the city and the county, how can they not bring it to scale? So I think the most effective thing to do is within your community, you've got to build some organization to actually do this. That's what we did with the Minnesota Early Learning Foundation. Do a pilot. Given all this science, you can't miss. And make sure that you have quality programs, that you start, if you can, start prenatal, work with the health community to identify these moms early on, and you won't miss. You're going to get health results, you're going to get cognitive success, you're going to get emotional and acute success. It's amazing. And today we need workers. This economy needs workers. So once you provide these parents with a scholarship, they can go back to work. And when people say, well, where are they going to go? If you provide enough scholarships in a community, so you keep it small, you'll find the market responding by opening up high-quality programs. Now, be generous with the scholarships. Have somebody come out and give them some idea what quality costs. In Minnesota, we're now at about $12,000 to $15,000 per year, because you want to incent the programs to get quality and open up more spots. That's why I said do it small at the beginning. You can do it for 400 families, 300 families, whatever. Show them and bring somebody from the university just to do the research, track the kids, and show the difference it makes. I'm confident if you do that, you will make a real mark in this field in your state.
Dr. Rolnick, thank you very much. I would say simply, at this point in your life, it'd be real easy to go out on the Speakers Bureau, go out touring the country just speaking, or candidly just retiring and having quite a casual life. You've chosen to pursue the betterment of the common good all over the world. And thank you for your time. Thank you for your dedication to early childhood education. We sincerely appreciate your time and candidly, your interest in Mississippi and many other places. So thank you.
Thank you. And again, thank you for the honor. Thank you for the honor. I appreciate it.
See you soon. Thank you. I'm going to turn the program over to Scott Waller, CEO of the Mississippi Economic Council at this time. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you, Dave. Folks, this has been an amazing day. I hope you feel the same way, because honestly, we have taken so much out of what we got. But it begins with that quote that was just up there about partnerships. The business community plays a role in making this happen, but we have to do it together with each of you, with other advocates, to make sure that Mississippi succeeds. So what did we take away from today? We've talked about research. The research that tells us where we are and where we need to go. We've talked about results, the programs that have been put in place that are creating really positive results for our children across the state. And we've talked about passion. I mean, Tamara had it for sure, right? She is passionate, as I'm sure each and every one of you sitting in this room are. So the question is, what's next? Where do we go from here? I have a favorite quote that I like to use that says that the difference between temptation and opportunity is you always get a second shot at temptation. Folks, let's not be tempted to say we want to do something. Let's seize this opportunity. Let's make sure that we walk out of here today with something that we want to do. So my challenge to you is think about all of the stuff you've learned today. It was a lot. You had a lot to take in. But narrow that down. Think of the one thing that you can go back to your community and you can implement right now to start making a difference in early childhood education, making a difference in assuring quality child care for our children across this state. That's how we make a difference. That's how it becomes something that begins, as Dr. Rolnick said, begins small, and it grows, and it grows, and it grows. It's up to each of us to make sure that we don't come to Jackson today, sit in here the whole morning, have lunch, leave, and go, that was nice. That was nice. No, we've got to put something in place to make a difference. And we're committed to doing that. I want y'all to be committed to doing it as well. Because without that partnership that I mentioned a minute ago, none of this happens. But working together, we can continue to see the types of results that's going to shine a spotlight on Mississippi in a very positive way. And it's going to make people think differently about who we are and what we are as a state. And that's how it happens. I thank you for being here. I want to take a minute to thank Linda and the Children's Foundation for all the hard work they did in City Walker and the program that we put together today. Any board members from the Children's Foundation, if you're here, stand up, raise your hand. I know there were some here earlier today. We had a couple of MEC board members as well today who were here. Thank you for what you do. And because it's the hard work that you're putting in that I believe we're going to see some really amazing results as we go forward. So, it's St. Patrick's Day, right? I see a lot of green in the room. I even found a green tie in my selection that I wore today. So it's extremely important, and I also think it's a good way to wrap up. Is I'm going to ask Tanya Ware to join us on stage, and she is going to close our meeting today with an Irish blessing.
May the road rise up to meet you. shine warm upon your face, and the wind fall soft upon your fields till we